Yes, we're all here. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Live from Toronto, this is IFA's Global Cafe. My name is Bruna Suertes. I'm Director of Communications, and it is my pleasure and honor to host today's session. Please keep in mind that today's session is being recorded. We're also live streaming it on our Facebook channel. And if you have any questions, please put them on the chat. Use the chat function on the bottom of the screen to pose your question. We will do our best to address the question. Today, we have a slightly different dynamics for this session. We have our very own Dr. Jane Barrett moderating today and a stellar lineup of guest speakers. So Jane, the floor is yours.
And thank you very much. And as I said, as Bruna said, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. You know, I've been in this job 20 years, and I think it's just only in recent times that I've really understood the power of society at the United Nations and the World Health Organization. So I thought it would be, you know, appropriate now that we actually talk with our representatives at the United Nations and WHO and really gain an understanding of how the voice of civil society can be truly heard at these agencies. The IFA is has the great pleasure and privilege of having official relations at the United Nations and World Health Organization. And just last year, we pledged to view all of our work streams through the lens of the 4 action areas and the 4 enablers of the Decade of Healthy Aging. And in saying that, it means that every single piece of work is going to be seen through the lens of long-term care, age-friendly, primary integrated care, and combating ageism. And that in and of itself is a powerful message. But how do our messages in civil society really reach WHO and the United Nations? Do they at all? And I'm sure that many of us today would have some skepticism around WHO and the United Nations. You know, they're big engines. But I see today that we have many people at our Global Cafe that are working at the United Nations and the World Health Organization, including our representatives such as Margaret Gillis and Dr. Bill Smith, you know, and these people are part of a community that work to influence and shape policy. The IFA talks about vertical advocacy and horizontal advocacy. And by that, we mean vertical advocacy. You know, we actually gather evidence to help influence and shape the policies and the messages to member states. And I think one key area that we were very successful with in the early stages of COVID was that, you know, from about 55 technical guidelines that WHO created, you know, only 5 had the words older persons. And so IFA analysed all of these technical guidelines and then put it to the WHO that we really needed a portal that talked about one of the most vulnerable groups in the world, older people, in the context of COVID. And that was achieved. I think another area that we've been quite successful with is strengthening and building connections across the technical units at WHO. As you would all know, we have a strong presence in the area of improving adult vaccination uptake rates globally. Yet the vaccine group is quite separate to the aging and health group and quite separate to the NCD group. And so we've worked to build those connections and have been successful in actually having some very key activities in our triennial plan, you know, that builds bridges across these technical units. Because what we know is that by bringing unlike together, by bringing vaccination, bringing healthy aging, bringing the NCD Alliance together, it actually builds and shapes a common agenda. So that being said, it's my great pleasure and honour not only to introduce the representatives to the United Nations from IFA, but actually to work with them. Each and every one of these representatives knows a whole lot more about the workings of the UN and the WHO than I do. And that's why we're going to have quite a different Global Cafe today. We're going to actually have a discussion with all of them. I want to make note that Zainoeddin our representative in Geneva, and also Kelly Fitzgerald, representative in Geneva and chair of the NGO committee in Geneva, is not able to be with us today, but both of them contribute significantly. Now, let me start off by first of all introducing, our representatives in New York, and I'm just going to name them, and then I'm going to go back and ask Cynthia Stuen to actually kick off the conversation today. Now, if you would like to answer questions as we go, that's going to be possible too, because Bruna and Luana are going to help gather the questions together. So the chair of the NGO committee in New York is Cynthia Stuen. Cynthia and I go a little way back, and we have common, I think, beliefs and agendas in the field of vision health, as well as many others. So Cynthia Stuen, Francis Zainoeddin, James O'Neill, Sandy Timmerman, and also Valerie Levy. And they're all part of our team at the United Nations in New York. Jackie Stark, former chair of the NGO Committee on Aging in Vienna, is with us today. And a particularly warm welcome, Jackie. I don't know how you've done it, because I know that you haven't been well in the last couple of weeks. So thank you for being with us. I'd like to now hand the floor to Cynthia. And Cynthia, can you just kick off, what your role is in the United Nations as part of the representation of the IFA?
At this moment, it's rather hard to separate my role as an IFA rep from the one of being the chair of the NGO Committee on Aging, very integrally tied. What is interesting is that all three of the NGO committees, New York, Geneva, Vienna, all were established in the late 70s. And when you really think about, the UN being established in 1945, it's kind of understandable why there wasn't a lot of focus on aging in 1945, when then I believe the average life expectancy was in the 60s for men and women. And it's just, but the role of the NGO Committee on Aging in New York has really been to raise awareness of the opportunities and challenges of this global aging society. And so we advocate within the UN and within civil society organizations that make up the civil society group at the UN to really ensure that the voices of older persons are heard, and the importance of recognizing us not as just beneficiaries or people who need to always be taken care of, that's an aspect, but that we are contributors to society and can still participate and be part of the economic and social prosperity of our communities. So that is really where we seek to make an impact. Now, obviously, the agenda of the UN follows a certain cycle. There's the annual General Assembly. There are the functional commissions, such as the Commission on Social Development or the Commission on the Status of Women. Our role is to make sure that each and every one of those commissions make sure we really make that older persons are represented and that their voices are heard. Now, that may be done by collaborating with other civil society organizations and organizing a side event. It might be ourselves organizing a side event. But the importance of bringing and raising that level. One of the things that we do each year that was established in 1990 was an observance of the International Day of Older Persons. The UN established October 1st as the UN International Day of Older Persons, and we observe that each year. Now, one of the issues is, for example, this year, October 1st falls on a Saturday. So we in New York and Vienna will be observing it on the 3rd of October, and I know Geneva's just struggling to make sure of the dates, but anyway, and we will be returning live. This year's theme, for example, on the International Day of Older Persons is the resilience of older persons in a changing world And in New York, our sub-theme is highlighting the contributions of older women. And I know Kelly Fitzgerald and the group in Geneva, we were all collaborating. Overall theme the same, but each of us will focus differently. We on Women, Geneva is going to focus more on climate change, and I'll let Jackie speak about Vienna. But those are just some examples of how we work and contribute.
So, Cynthia, I just want to come back and pick up on a couple of words that you use, and we use them very frequently, and that is we want to ensure the voice of older people and we want to advocate. So what does it really mean? What does it look like at the UN or the WHO when we actually have a voice? What does that look like? And what are we advocating for?
Mm-hmm. Right. And, you know, each of, for example, Commission on Status of Women might have one of the functional commissions. Each year it has a theme, and then it has a review theme. And one of the strategies we always try to ensure is that older persons are represented on the various panels within the events, whether it be making nominations to speak from the floor, providing oral interventions at the sessions, and it's been much more, in many ways, able for people to participate globally because of the pandemic, when many more opportunities, you didn't have to be at the UN in person for the Commission on the Status of Women. You could participate virtually. So that is really, you know, it's a horrible side effect of a terrible pandemic, but it really has opened up that opportunity. The other is, for example, the UN will require that there be an equal balance of men and women on a dais panel. Well, if all civil society is young people, then that's not very representative, is it? So we're really working hard to ensure that there's equality and equity, of course, depending on the topic. But those are some of the ways. The other is just, you know, one of the things that's really wonderful about when you are in New York and you're able to go to those functional commissions or you really have an opportunity then also to meet people from the missions, there are 193 member states, and then sometimes we can get to know them and actually advocate, go to their mission, make an appointment with their person who covers our issues, which are third committee issues, and really try to convince them about why it's important. And even if their country only has 5% of their population is aging, every one of those 193 member states, that population of aging is increasing. So whether it goes from 5 to 10%, or it goes from 5 to 8%, or it goes in more developed countries to 20, 25%, we all have the same issue. And it's not one group against another, it's a society for all ages.
Okay.
And we really have Kofi Annan to thank for that term.
Yeah. We also have a lot to say about, you know, how civil society has sustained this call for representation and older people, older persons being in statements and calls for action. So is it any different, Jackie, in Vienna? You know, what's the focus in Vienna?
I would say Vienna is probably the smallest NGO committee on aging. I think we have about 25 international organizations involved, and there's a lot of overlap between the organizations in New York and in Geneva. But I would say we really try to keep the communication going about issues relevant to aging. And I think one very special thing is over the years, we've really been lucky that the social ministry has been very supportive of everything we've been doing. We had Dr. Erika Winkler, and now we have Magister Verena Schriebel, who attend our meetings regularly, also in the UN. So I would say if you check out our website, you get to see which organizations are involved. And Actually, we have a lot of members on our committee who are on the Committee on the Status of Women, on the Peace Committee, on the Sustainable Development Goals. So here we have the opportunity to share the information from the other committees to our members, which is important, I would say. So I think communication on issues related to aging and awareness of aging issues are the main things that are important for us. And our main event is the UN IDOPE. And if you check out our website, you'll see the preliminary program already. And we have really a good lineup of speakers, from Alexander Sederenko to the social minister to Dr. Monika Vana, a member of the European Parliament who's been involved over the years in our event. So I'm looking forward to that.
Look, thank you, Jacqueline. That really builds on what Cynthia's been saying about the importance of relationships. And what you've just talked about is the connection with government, you know, and actually informing government and government being informed. And I think that's one of the key roles, because when we talk about advocacy, it's really about helping to inform and to influence and shape policies. So that's a critical piece, because, you know, we want trusting relationships, you know, to be able to communicate, I think, the essential nature of the issues that older people are dealing with, but also, as Cynthia said, the resilience and the power of older people. Thank you. I want to now turn to Frances. Frances, you're that person, that go-to person around the UN and WHO. From my purview, it's a very complex set of machinery that's going on in all different ways. And you've had a career at the United Nations, and now that we're very fortunate in having you to represent us and other organisations at the UN. So from your perspective, help us to understand how something like the high-level political forum that you've been immersed in the preparations, how does civil society's voice really rise to the top of those complex conversations?
Thank you, Jane. First of all, I think the UN is definitely a place where governments from around the world are committed to make the world a better place. And it's at the global level where they all meet and decide on recommendations and plans of action, programs of action. And so it's very important that we recognize that member states do want to address global issues. And really what happens is that what is not working at the national level is, international action or international intervention is necessary. So it's a commitment by governments to respect each other and to work together to maintain peace, security, economic and social development and the protection of human rights. I want to say that we look beyond our own communities. We find that many older people around the world are suffering from the same things: ageism, age discrimination, lack of accessible and affordable healthcare, long-term care and palliative care. There is elder abuse, violence and neglect, and routine violations of human rights in terms of health, food, housing. So what is happening in our communities is also happening throughout many, many communities throughout the world. So at the UN, meetings and intergovernmental deliberations take place. And as Cynthia also pointed out, we monitor the discussions and we make sure that older persons find a place in the recommendations that come out of intergovernmental bodies. I want to say that very often in General Assembly resolutions, whether it's at the General Assembly level or at the functional commissions, Commission on the Status of Women, Commission for Social Development, etc., very often they talk about vulnerable groups such as women, children, youth, persons with disabilities, migrants, Indigenous peoples. And so what we want is to make sure that older persons is included in that listing. That's a huge amount of work leading up to the negotiations and following the negotiations and making sure that those two words appear in resolutions and programs of action. As you know, Jane, the high-level political forum, which is tasked with reviewing the implementation of the SDGs, meets every year. And the stakeholder group on aging was established in 2013, and IFA was one of the founding members of the stakeholder group on aging, which was established to, first of all, include references to older persons in the 2030 agenda, and thereafter to report on it at the high-level political forum every year. And at the high-level political forum, there is a ministerial declaration that becomes the outcome. And in that, we negotiate and we work with our colleagues, other major groups and other stakeholders, other civil society organizations, to make sure that older persons are referenced in the outcome.
So Francis, I'm going to stop you there and ask you a couple of questions. You use the word negotiation quite a lot. Does civil society negotiate? That's one question. And just to make the connection, the stakeholder working group on aging is civil society. We have formed and we then report to, we're part of the HLPF. Can you clarify, explain those two things? Do we do the negotiation, or do we help negotiate to get older people on the recommendations? How does that work?
Aha, great questions. Negotiations. Very often civil society is not part of the official negotiations that take place. We have to work through government, friendly governments. For older persons, we have a group of friends of older persons, and we're in constant touch with them to say, by the way, there's a meeting taking place, and we would like you to make sure that older persons are reflected in those negotiations. And we provide wording, we provide advice to our friendly governments as to how we perceive the outcome of an intergovernmental body. And this we actually do with a high-level political forum every single year. And as Cynthia pointed out, with a commission on the status of women as well. It's a struggle. NGOs are not permitted to actually negotiate at the table. We come in at the very early stages. We're allowed in the room and we voice our opinions, but in terms of the actual negotiation, we don't participate in the quote informal discussions that member states have, but we do it through our friendly governments, so that when they participate in the negotiation, then they can voice our concerns.
Okay, so that's very helpful. And it's an important question, isn't it? Because it then speaks to the importance of NGOs' relationship with governments, at the country level, which is critical. So I just want to now go to James. We're talking about friendly governments. I love that word, don't you, James? Friendly governments. And friendly governments are those that, will open their door and will have a conversation with us. So, James, we often talk about local to global and global to local. And I think from your perspective, you've got some, reasonable examples of friendly governments and the achievements that have been made with civil society. And then I'm going to move to Sandy. James?
Good morning, everyone. It's very important. I believe that was Cynthia that mentioned it's important to hear the voices of the older adult. Well, turn it around. It's important that different countries and NGOs provide information that will help the health and welfare of older adults. So, for example, during COVID, Dr. Tedros gave a number of examples of what should and shouldn't be done. And then these were adopted in the United States. We had a commissioner who was in charge of COVID. And then on the state level, you'd have someone also who was picking up that information and disseminating it to individuals. The importance of these organizations is that they're able to get to the local person, the individual people, and provide the information that's necessary to maintain their health. So it becomes important. It's like a pyramid going down one step at a time and building necessities and the needs of older people.
So look, thank you, James, for that, because I think what you've really tried to do is say that every person in civil society, you know, has the ability to access decision makers that will make a difference upline and downline, whether it's at the municipality level, whether it's at the state level, whether it's at the national level. And I think age-friendly citizen communities is a good example. The IFA also tries to forge new areas. They're quite pioneering in many respects. And one of those pioneers in my mind is Sandy Timmerman. And Sandy, you know, your work, you know, in really bridging generations has been fundamental to the IFA's thinking, you know, particularly at the Global Network Executive Committee work and the focus on intergenerational work. Why is that so important? And what do you do there?
Thanks, Jane. I think, first of all, it's important for people to know that the UN is very youth-oriented and youth-focused. And it's surprising to those of us who are gerontologists or in the field of aging that aging isn't top of mind. It certainly is in parts of the UN, but you know, from my perspective, youth has quite a voice. So my theory has been, and it's a particular area of interest for me, if in fact youth has some power within the UN, why not join them and work together on common causes that we have, help them with their causes, and then they can work together with us. What I've been doing is trying also to remove some stereotypes in the group because, for example, I'm on a panel on ageism today for the International Youth Day, which I was very pleased I got invited to speak. And what I realized is ageism is viewed from the lens of younger. Ageism is an issue for younger people, and they view ageism as something that impacts them. And oh yes, we ought to ask some older people what they think too. And of course, from my perspective, every panel I've been on in the past in the gerontological world has been focused solely on us, on the older population. So it's a wonderful way to introduce the life course approach, which IFA has been so keen on, and to say, when you're dealing with issues, for example, of abuse of girls and women, why not think about the abuse of elders and to look at the issue in a very holistic way? I think it's important for us to recognize some of the issues that younger people are concerned about, like climate change. And so the other piece of it for me is to say, we care about the climate too. Some younger people think that the boomers are the cause of some of our issues in society. that are detrimental. And I like to say we have activists. We've been working in this area for a long time, and we are lively, we're productive, we want to join with you. And so that's a little taste of what we're doing. And it is an area that I think IFA can shine in.
Thank you for that. You know, I'm interested in the words resilience, and then you go lively and productive, and we can join with you. And I think that's the kind of sentiments about resilience too, that while older people are a vulnerable group in the context of health and well-being and chronic comorbid conditions, it is also about what contribution is being made, not can be made. So I just want to turn to Valerie Levy. Valerie, you're one of our UN reps at the United Nations in New York, and thank you for being with us. And talk with us a little bit about the importance of civil society in country work, and then we'll open the floor up to questions.
Civil society and NGOs play an indispensable role in country, in our work with the UN. And if I can offer you a quote from the late Secretary General of the UN, of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, he said, "Today, no UN development effort can make real headway without the support of civil society." And that has proven so over the years. If I can give you a few examples of large NGOs within the United States that have made quite an effort, a collective effort with the United Nations, such as the National Council on Aging. Many of you have heard of these, the American Society on Aging, AARP, the Gerontological Society of America are just a few. And without the support of civil society and the message that it brings to the UN, their efforts would be diminished. For example, the collaborative effort between the NGOs and the United Nations can be seen across the board in many areas. In developing the 2015 agenda, we were able to push for recognition of older people to be part of that agenda. And more recently, NGOs within the United States worked very hard in the development of the Sustainable Development Goals with recognition of older people of all age, for all ages. This kind of language included in the SDGs when initially, when they were first published, there was no mention of older persons. So NGOs play a vital role. They keep the United Nations aware of developments across the nation in aging, of issues that need to be addressed urgently. And at the moment, they are seeking voluntarily, if you will, our guidance and support for many of the policies being developed at the moment. And we can look to civil society as a beacon in the future for supporting the UN in its work.
Thank you very much, Valerie. And I think they're poignant statements. I think, though, that what we're really doing on a day-to-day basis is monitoring. We're monitoring, we're actually gathering the views, the evidence on the ground, and then how do we actually work to influence? How do we get those friendly governments, to be involved? And I think it's really important that, civil society actually is joined in its efforts. One of the questions that's been posed today is, what about AARP and CARP, and where does that all fit in? Some NGOs are members of IFA. AARP is a member of the IFA, but AARP has status at the United Nations also. But what I can tell you is that, you know, we're great bedfellows. We all work in a connected way on a common agenda. And so I see that we have Congo with us today. You know, I see Edwin Walker from the administration. Hi, Edwin. And I also know that Amal is with us from UNDESA. Amal, did you want to make any comment? And I know that I've identified you without notice, but thank you for being with us today, and we would welcome your comments about the role of civil society at the UN.
Thank you, Jane. Good morning, and apologies, I'm having a few technical issues with my camera, so I'll keep it off. It's a pleasure to listen to all your colleagues today, and it's been taking me on a short memory trip over the past years, recalling how many processes within the UN were triggered, initiated by civil society. For example, the Trust Fund of UN Women to end violence against women, through an initiative by civil society, included older women in a couple of those years as a special focus. And in fact, 2 civil society organizations representing older people received funding to address elder abuse. The Titchfield Group, that's a voluntary group of national statistical offices around the world, was initiated through civil society's voice, specifically ARP, to establish that group, which is now working on standardizing age disaggregated data. And the examples are plenty. And I want to add that for the International Day of Older Persons, unlike other international days at the UN, where the UN decides on what the theme would be, the theme has been for years decided by older persons themselves in collaboration with us. But it's something that they consult, you guys consult with your constituents and come back and tell us, what is it that you want to highlight this year? We rely heavily on your participation. I'm a strong believer in nothing about us without us. And member states delegations in New York, it makes a difference when they see you, when they hear you, when you talk to them. It influences their thinking, their priorities. And our role really, Jane, has been just to play a supportive role, just to open the door. And once you guys walk in, you do your thing, and which mostly ends up with more work for us, and that's a good thing. So thank you.
Look, thank you, Amal. And I think we can't walk in without your door being open. And I think that's what I have seen in recent times with your leadership. And so you have enabled civil society to have a stronger and greater voice and to take risks, you know, calculated risks, but risks. So we thank you. I'd like to now just take a couple of questions from the floor, from Kathy Klein to begin with, and then followed by Margaret Gillis, and then we'll go back to the panel to respond. So Kathy?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just hadn't intended to ask a question, but I'm curious with this group because we've all worked together a long time, and it's certainly been my impression, and I wanted to know whether it was yours as well, that since Kofi Annan really invited civil society to come into the UN, which we were pretty much excluded from, it's my impression that we actually are welcomed, if quietly or silently, because civil society can raise the kind of difficult issues based on our on-the-ground evidence and voices of real people that they themselves cannot do. That it's great. I mean, you folks do and don't know how much people like Francis do to actually allow us to enter the UN. But without our pressure, we're the ones who have the ability to monitor what they're doing and can say things that I feel the UN itself and the UN staff often cannot. So I wondered, do you share that impression?
I think I will grab that question before I open it to the floor, but I'd like to hear from Margaret first, and then we'll go back. So Margaret?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Jane, for this opportunity. IFA has had a leadership role in pulling together civil society, and I've certainly benefited from that in the years that I've been working at the United Nations. Most recently, you've been talking about looking at different models that have been successful at the UN, like the NCD committee. And can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you're doing on that front? Because I think it's a great one for us all to get behind. So if you could just share a little more about that, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. All right, so question one from Kathy. Perhaps Cynthia, you can give that a go, and then I'll follow up and respond to Margaret.
Absolutely. You are right on target, Kathy, because it was actually in the year leading up to the International Year of Older Persons in 1999. It was 1998 when Kofi Annan made a brilliant speech, and at the UN International Day of Older Persons that previous year, where the theme was a society for all ages. And he put it in the context of, we've never before seen this kind of, we have the, post-industrial revolution, we have the age of the internet and digitalization, but we have the age of longevity. And he was the one who really set that stage of saying, to not look at older persons as just recipients or beneficiaries, but as people who can give in their own community. And you are absolute, I totally agree. I think it turned, but it backed up even before then with the Dominican Republic Assistant Ambassador. She was the alternate ambassador, Julia Alvarez, who really championed. And she was the one who, in picking up after the World Assembly, the Second World Assembly on Aging in 2002, but the first one in 1982, she really began the mission at the UN to educate the ambassador, the other missions, about nothing about us without us. And she's sort of known historically as our ambassador of aging. So the groundwork was being laid by her, but Kofi Annan exquisitely expressed it. So thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. In response to your question, Margaret, the IFA works to bring unlike together. We believe that we've got to work across sectors and across disciplines and bring organisations together to develop a common agenda. In the context of the Decade of Healthy Ageing, IFA and HelpAge and the NGO Committee on Ageing in Geneva and the ILC Global Alliance, conducted a mapping and engagement initiative and just recently had a colloquium. The purpose of the colloquium is to understand how we could, organisations across the world, that are dedicated to ageing but associated with the impact of ageing. So architects, for example, lawyers, urban planners, town planners. What would it look like if we all came together and had a common agenda around the Decade of Healthy Ageing? Now, we do this because we are influential by ourselves, but we are much more influential when you have 10,000 organisations that are actually talking the same language from different perspectives to member states, government, and the WHO and the UN. So we're moving forward in establishing models of how we can formally work together. And the Non-Communicable Disease Alliance, which is in formal relations with the WHO, is one of those models. So the colloquium gives rise to IFA and others developing a steering group to formalise how all of us, regardless of what sector or discipline that we come from, if one of our goals is to improve the quality of life of older people, then this alliance may enable us to influence policy and then improve the quality of life. So that's how, but thank you for the question. I now like to go to Eileen from Ireland and Bill Smith. So Eileen, would you like to come forward with your question?
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you very much to all the speakers and to everybody who work at our behalf throughout the world. My big question is, Why do the speakers have any view as to why the Convention on Human Rights for Older Persons is not being implemented, even though it has been talked about and on the agenda for decades? So where are the friendly governments? And I'm just wondering, is it now time for action? Because we now are at the table, we are now at the room, we have our voices, but it's not being translated into this convention.
I think the ideal person to respond to that is Francis. Francis, you represent the IFA on the steering group for the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, and you did have your hand up. So I'll get you to respond to that, and then I'll get Bill Smith to come on.
Yes, I'd like to just respond initially to Kathy about NGOs being able to say things that member states can't. And I think that is a point. You know, member states have to be diplomatic and they have to be very careful about what they say, whereas NGOs can be much more frank. I think one of the things that member states are often fearful of us is that because they look upon us as watchdogs, we are monitoring what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Very often they give glowing reports of what's happening at the national level, and NGOs from different countries are wondering, are we living in the same country? You know, because things are really not happening like that. So NGOs provide a way to draw attention to the fact that everything is not as rosy as member states say that it's happening at the national level. So I want to also point out that at the global level, following on what James was saying, that we should look at agreements that have been reached at the global level in order for us to advocate at the local level. Because if things are not happening at the local level in terms of agreements on poverty, on food security, on health issues, we should at the national level be able to go to our local authorities and say, by the way, Canada, United States, Cameroon, we have at the global level agreed on this. What are you doing about it? And I think it's very important for local advocacy groups to be aware of what their governments have agreed at the global level. And on the question of the convention, yes, we all have to be very, very patient. We have had 12 sessions of the open-ended working group to discuss the feasibility of having a convention. And they've spent the 12 years reviewing specific issues, whether it's security, access to justice, violence against elder abuse, right to employment, education, et cetera, but they have not actually looked at the gaps in the current human rights treaty bodies to see what is missing and why we need a convention. For me, it's a delaying tactic. Fortunately, the Human Rights Council has been very much involved of late. And in fact, there is a meeting that's going to take place on the 29th and 30th of August. And I would encourage everybody to go on the either the NGO Committee on Aging website, where there's a link to register to attend or participate in that meeting, where experts in the aging field will be discussing the gaps in the human rights treaties regime and why we need a convention. The open-ended working group has also established a core group, which we are following. And these are the issues that, as IFA reps, we monitor and make sure we know what's happening. There is a core group, a small core group that is met twice to discuss how to move forward beyond 2023 in order to get the process moving much more quickly beyond just discussing aging issues, and actually to discuss the need for a convention. It's a long slog. We've been working with very many other NGOs on this, and as Jane was mentioning, the Global Alliance, which IFA was also a founding member of the Global Alliance for the Rights of Older People, which is an advocacy group preparing NGOs for the meetings of the open-ended working group on aging. I want to point out that nobody, no government is against the rights of older persons, obviously. What some governments are against is the need for a legal instrument in order to promote those rights and to protect those rights. So it's a political decision. It's not a substantive issue. Everybody agrees that the rights of older persons should be protected. So the role of civil society at the national level, we absolutely need everybody at the national.
You've just put yourself on mute, Francis, but.
Did it go off?
Yep, it's all right, but we've got the message that it's complex, but we've got to have stickability. So keeping to move forward. We're going to actually take the last two questions. Bill Smith.
Just very quickly, I've really witnessed IFA's leadership and the expert service that the representatives have provided at the NGO Committee on Aging, as well as at the broader community on this effort. I've had the painful pleasure to be part of all 12 working groups. That when it started, I thought it would be a one-year effort, that it's like an apple pie. But that was, Francis taught me my naivety. I just a couple of comments. One is, Amal, keep the door open. I think that you are a breath of fresh air as a focal point for us, and I really do appreciate your efforts. And Jane, I think you probably answered my question also through your discussion on the colloquium and the alliance, because my issue is, how do we get this to member states? What can IFA do differently to get it to the member states to affect the legal instrument that we're striving for?
Yeah. Look, thank you, Bill. And yes, you're right. We've got to work differently and with different stakeholders. Talking and working with the same is not going to cut it. And that's why we're very purposeful in cross-sector, cross-discipline collaboration, because the more voices from different sectors and disciplines, the more member states are going to listen. And I think, Thelma, for your question about regional work, you know, CIRO did a marvellous job, and so did UNECE, you know, around MIPA and the consultation. And from IFA's perspective, we have just implemented a regional structure where directors and secretariat are going to be looking at the issues at a regional level. And so I think that you're going to see some action there. And Shmuel, no, we haven't been ignoring your question. Your question is, how does IFA support people in retirement? And I think what we've really tried to demonstrate today is that we are really looking at a life course approach. So the issues of retirement do, in fact, come into play in our discussions with the intergovernmental bodies in the context of resilience, productivity, being healthy, being volunteers. So sometimes it's very much a situational, a country perspective that we've got to look at. But people in retirement are not forgotten in any of our conversations. So I thank you all for the questions. I'd like to now just ask a couple of the representatives for their closing message, and then I'll hand the floor back. So let's do it in reverse. Valerie, what's your takeaway message to this group?
I would like the group to know that NGOs and civil society play a key role in making the work of the UN happen. And what I would like to see us do is to expand our efforts to be more collaborative, to bring in as many NGOs and civil society organizations to the table as possible to continue our monitoring. As Francis and others have said, we are able to initiate conversations that cannot be done on the national level in many governments.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have a hard stop at 8 o'clock, so I want to skip through. So James, any final comment?
Just to remember that what we do is very important in moving forward the agenda for the human rights and of older people. And anything that we can do to help you and disseminate information to you that could be helpful is going to be very important.
Thank you. Jackie, any final comment?
No, I would just like to thank the New York and the Geneva groups for being leaders in our fight for what we want to do. And I'd like to also thank you for just raising a lot of questions that we have to follow up on, and all your hard work, and Greg's too. Thank you.
Team effort. So Sandy, Francis, then Cynthia. Sandy?
Yes, I think it's important for our aging world to understand how the UN works. That's really important. And I also feel that we can do very good work by getting together with groups that might not know about our concerns and saying, let's work together and come up with a common agenda.
Thank you, Sandy. Francis, then Cynthia.
Yes, thank you very much, Jane. I strongly believe that there's strength in numbers, and it's really important for us. And we do collaborate with many, many NGOs on this important issue. So there's a lot of work in between meetings. We meet separately with our colleagues, and we really welcome more input from the national level to our work as well. It's very important for local to global, global to local.
Thank you. Cynthia?
Absolutely. Two things. One, I think it remains incumbent on all of us to own ageism and counteract it every day of our lives. And secondly, we can develop the political will in each of our countries to do the right thing and get a convention on the human rights of older persons. Let's get to work.
Okay, I think the pertinent words there are we can. In closing, I want to thank you for an inspirational and really meaningful discussion today at our Global Cafe. I'd like to also just acknowledge Edwin Walker again from the US administration. Thank you for being with us. It's great to see your smile. And also Amal Abu Rafi. Thank you for being with us, but also collectively. A special note of thanks to my team. It's been a heavy lift for Bruno, Luana and Greg this week, as I've been out of action for a few days. So I thank you for the heavy lift and for a smooth process. And my goodness me, each and every one of you at the UN representing IFA are just an inspiration to me every single time I listen to you. So thank you very much. We look forward to you joining with us next week at our IFA Global Cafe, where there'll be much more to discuss about how we work together to improve the quality of life of older people. And you'll be pleased to know that Vijay Naradu will be with us. Many of you will know Vijay, but we'll have him to talk with us about advocating for the rights of older adults in lower middle income countries. So join with us. Thank you very much.